fiery speech at the Republican National Convention today, formally renominated as the Republican Party's presidential candidate. Joining us now to break down what his message was through this speech, we have Bethany Mandel, who is an American political commentator. Bethany, could you tell us a little bit about this speech? What are the messages that Donald Trump was trying to get across to the American people and to his base?
So I think that he was trying to reassure Americans that he is the more competent candidate. He spoke much more differently than he's ever spoken before Saturday's attempted assassination. He was much more introspective, much more filled with reverence, and he was much more poised, especially in the beginning of his speech. It went on to ramble a lot. We saw a lot of the Donald Trump that we have come to know throughout all of the rallies that he's done, the hundreds of rallies he's done around the country. But he was really trying to signal to his base and to the wider American people that he would be a unifying candidate, unlike one that he perhaps was the first time he ran.
Right. So could I ask you a little bit about his message of unity? He, of course, talked about trying to be the president for all Americans, not just half of Americans. Did you see that as a shift in terms of his, you already mentioned it, but did you see it as a shift in terms of his political brand? In the past, he mentioned that after the assassination attempt on him last week, that his message and his speech would change. And did you see that change specifically in terms of his messaging during the speech?
So I think that he was always positioning himself as a more moderate candidate. He was painted by the American media as someone who was very reactionary and very far right. But the reality was he did more for working class Americans of all colors than previous administrations had done. But I think that he's come to realize that the way that he speaks was perhaps not unifying, and he's really changed the way that he has been speaking since the assassination attempt.
Understood. In terms of the substantive issues that he was raising, he was talking about inflation, he was talking about the prices of energy, he was talking about the border crisis. What were the top issues that you felt that he was trying to raise to really energize his base and to get the American people to realize that perhaps he is the better choice to be reelected to the
Yeah.
White House?
So, I mean, the inflation issue is a massive one, and I think that's one that is a winning issue for anyone who decides to run on it. And it's a lot easier for Donald Trump to run on it because it wasn't nearly as bad under his administration. Gas was half the price when he was president. Food prices have gone up in some ways double since Joe Biden became president. So I think that that's a really winning issue. Over the course of the RNC over the last few days, there's been a heavy emphasis on the foreign policy failures of the Biden administration. And I think that that resonates very deeply with Americans, especially with the tragic loss of life when we pulled out of Afghanistan, and also the American loss of life in Israel, and also the 8 American hostages that are still being held in Gaza.
Right. Could I also ask you one more thing on his policy towards, during his speech, he talked about the Democratic Party a great deal. He talked about the fact that he perceives a partisan witch hunt against him. How does that contrast with his sort of message for unity more generally and his sort of reaching out to the Democratic Party?
Yeah, I mean, he is correct that there has been a witch hunt against him, unlike any other in American history, and he has to address that because a lot of these cases are still ongoing. One of the strongest cases that's being waged against him was dropped, and he mentioned that in his speech. But he I think needs to address that elephant in the room to say, I want this to be a campaign about the issues, but at the end of the day, I'm being dragged through a judicial system that's in many ways, some banana republic stuff in a lot of these jurisdictions. And so I think that he's trying to rise above that, and he's being held down in a lot of ways by judicial people in the judicial system who are acting on politics and not on legal basis.
Understood. And moving forward, we often heard that a Republican National Convention or a national convention for any political party tends to bump up the support for a particular candidate. He's already had a strong base of support coming in due to the attempted assassination, due to his strength in the presidential debate. Do you think that the RNC convention in Milwaukee will continue to solidify his support and his lead in the presidential polls?
I think that we're not going to see wild swings back and forth. I think we're going to see a couple points here, a couple points there. But I do think that this convention was absolutely helpful. It was beautifully orchestrated, beautifully scripted. Every night was honestly, it played out like a show. Which one would come to expect from Donald Trump, who is a showman at the end of the day. I don't think that we're going to see the same kind of show from the DNC. There's going to be a lot of chaos. We don't even necessarily know who's going to be at the top of the ticket when the DNC, rolls around. So there is a lot more chaos and a lot more upheaval and potentially anger at the DNC that we did not see at the RNC. There was a lot of excitement, a lot of enthusiasm. Even on CNN, people were saying, I haven't felt this much energy in the air at a convention since the first Mama convention in 2008. So I think that there was a very different feeling at the RNC than there will be at the DNC in just a few weeks.
Right. And then a final question, I'll just ask you about the Democratic Party and how they're going to be looking at what's happened in this convention. Increasingly, even as Trump was speaking, there were reports coming in of various congressional leaders urging Biden to get out of the race. In fact, some already reporting that Kamala Harris, of course, and some others might be looking for an open convention. Could I ask you how the Democratic Party is looking at its game plan moving forward?
I mean, I'm not sure that they really know. I mean, this is the problem. There's a person at the top of the ticket, Joe Biden, who doesn't want to step aside, but there is a growing swell behind him of people who want to force him, including donors. And I think that that's a major component of a potential decision on the part of Joe Biden is that the major donors might abandon him. But at the end of the day, we're really not sure what's going to happen. And that's because, he is the deciding factor, but can he stand alone? That remains to be seen.
Understood. Bethany Mandel, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.